But everybody knows what we're about to have. We're about to have a conversation with the playwright, the great playwright, great American and American playwright, Tony Kushner. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Kushner. Welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to give a brief bio of Tony Kushner's work, and then we're going to have a conversation and love to have it open up for you all. Tony Kushner's many works include the plays A Bright Room Called Day, Angels and America, Slavs, and Homebody Cabal, the musical Caroline or Change, the opera A Blizzard on Marblehead Neck, and the screenplays for Angels in America, Munich, Lincoln, West Side Story, and the Fabelmans. He's also the author of Brundabar and The Art of Marie Sendek, 1980 to the present. I don't know if anybody saw that at the New Victory Theater many years ago. Not that many, but a while ago. It's very moving. And the co-editor with Alyssa Solomon of Wrestling with Zion. Kushner has received a Pulitzer Prize, a National Medal of Arts, 2 Tony Awards, 3 Obie Awards, 2 Evening Standard Awards, an Olivia Award, an Emmy Award, and the Steinberg Distinguished Playwright Award, among others, and the adoration of this room. So, ladies and gentlemen, Tony Kushner. Tony knows who you are. We're going to find out a little bit about him. We have a room full of theater teachers, educators who work with our New York City school kids every day. So thank you all for what you do. I want to start with the art, the NT collection, which it was the American Association for the National Theater is how we were able to bring Tony here. So shout out to the AANT. The relevance of Angels in America today, we saw it in London, we saw it here. The pandemic, minds go to COVID, still an incredibly relevant play after all of these years. Can you maybe speak to why you think that is?
Oh, God. Well, you know, there's a lot in it. It's very long, so something in it will probably have some reference to something that's going on in the world. I don't know. I'm really happy that it's 30-something years old now, which, you know, compared to Aeschylus is not terribly old, but it's lasted for quite a while, and it still seems to work really well. It means a lot to me that it's being taught as much as it is in colleges, certainly. But it seems to work well as a text for young people. All the characters in it are relatively young, except for Roy and Hannah. There are a couple of the very old rabbi and so on, but the main characters are young, and I think so. It's easy. It's relatable in that way. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to answer that question. I hope I die before it becomes irrelevant. I'd like to not.
Take it this best way that will happen.
Just get out of here before I become an unknown. But it's so far it's doing well. And the most recent revival of it at the National was a huge success. So that was nice.
So you've talked about how every time it's done, or not every time it's done, but you rework it. Talk to us a little bit. I think the process would be really interesting for this room. Why? Why do you take certain moments or scenes and feel like you need to kind of rework them? Not necessarily update them, but rework them.
Yeah, no, I haven't updated anything. And I haven't touched part 1, Millennium Approaches, since 1990, when I finished it the first time. I think I've made one little cut. And then I put part of the cut back in because somebody yelled at me because they missed the line that I took out. But the two halves of the play are very different, and Perestroika has always felt to me like a play that has some kind of interesting, sort of deep internal disequilibrium. It's not. I don't think it'll ever feel finished. And for some reason, I don't know why this is, but if you think about it, 2-part plays. The great, the greatest of all 2-part plays, Goethe's Faust, and then probably second greatest, Ibsen's Peer Gynt. They're both, the first part is very sort of tightly done, and then the second part kind of sprawls all over the place. And I don't know why that is. I think, there's a lot of, maybe a certain degree of concentration and discipline for the first part, and then you feel like you've earned the right to just take the girdle off and and the thing sprawled. So the Beatles with Abbey Road and then the White Album. It's kind of like, so I don't know. I mean, but I've always, I think I'm not going to do any more rewrites of Perestroika. That's what I keep saying. I have one, there are like 5 different versions of it in print now. And I have a new one that's based on the revival that the National did when it came to Broadway. And I'm going to get that in print sometime this year, I think. And then I'd like to, I would really like to be done with it, because it's enough already. So,
I'd be really curious to hear who out there right now that is playwriting. I want to touch a little bit about your journey, but first off, who's doing some playwriting right now that you like, you're more of inspired?
I hate doing this because I'm going to leave somebody out.
No.
And then somebody's, this is an incredibly exciting, the last 20, 30, 40 years of American playwriting has been an explosion of a really amazing talent. So, there's okay, I'm not going to do any superlatives, because that's really the way to get into trouble. But there are very great playwrights writing right now. I'm a huge fan of Susan Louis Parks. I think her plays are, I think she's a genius, which is not a word I use very often. I'm a big fan of Stephen Adly Guirgis, of Annie Baker, of Amy Herzog, of, oh my God, now I'm going to leave people off. Jeremy O. Harris, the author of the Slave Play, which is one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen. I think and his next play, Daddy, I think he's absolutely a remarkable writer. Brandon Jacob Jenkins, who has a play on Broadway now, Appropriate, which is great, and his play this past summer, The Comeuppance, which is, did you see it? Oh my God, it was terrifying and so brilliant. I mean, he's absolutely incredible. And everybody that I didn't mention would hate me now. But
so maybe it's a little bit about what is it about playwriting, or the playwrights you mentioned, that draws your attention? What is it about theater that piques your interest?
I like anybody who takes this very, very old medium, as old as there's been theater as long as there's been art, as far as we know, and grabs hold of it and does one of 2 things, or both things, in the case of somebody like Susan Laurie, both trying to make theater say things that it's never said before, and challenging the way it's been done before, sort of inventing new ways of creating scripts for theatrical events. The way that theater never ceases to surprise you. There's always a comeuppance waiting in the wings. There's always something new to be said that no one has ever said before. And there are always new forms, new ways of advancing old forms. I mean, I consider myself a narrative realist dramatist, but I feel proud of the fact that I think the Angels changed a few of the rules for naturalism or realism in theater, and I think anything that does that is exciting to me. If I walk out of the theater feeling kind of jealous, I know I've seen something. I mean, I walk out there, God damn it! Why? The great Steve Martin joke. I think it was one of the Oscars ceremonies where he said, "I love welcoming the young people to film because they remind me of my death." So it's exciting. I mean, I love playwriting because playwriting is a very odd thing. I've said this many times before, but playwriting is both a literary and a theatrical medium. Unlike screenwriting, which is a strange thing. I mean, I published the screenplay to Lincoln, but the studio owns the material, so it has all screenplays are sort of retrofitted, so that no director wants you to sort of tell what he or she cut out of your script. So it's sort of made to post-conform to the movie, which means you just go watch the movie. The play has, a written play has an independent existence from any production. And of course, because the greatest writer that ever lived exists both in textual form and on stage, Nobody really loves reading plays, but people do read plays. And when you're writing a play, I think you play around with the relationship between this thing that you're doing that's a score for a kinetic event and something to be read. And when it's on stage, the audience is aware that the actors who seem to be generating this material spontaneously are actually, saying things that have already been written down. So there's a kind of a hunger for the text, especially if it's a good play. You sort of want to go back and have a chance to, mull over certain things. And when you're reading it, you're very much aware of the fact that it will get up on its feet, and you don't know what would it look like in the mouth and the body of this actor or that actor, and so on. So it's a haunted kind of art form. And I think that the best playwrights, the playwrights I like the most, play games with it. If you look at Susan Laurie Park's scripts, one of the things that she does that's just, and she made this up, you usually put, like, if you want a silence or a kind of a pause, you write pause or a little pause or beat or, that thing. And Susan Laurie, in her stage directions, does things like a spell, as in rest a spell. So a spell, a spell, a spell, and she usually go down half a page. And she doesn't tell you how to play it, so actors have to sort of like grapple with it. And it changed, and when you read it the first time, you think, well, what does that look like on stage? And there's no single answer, but it's that kind of inventiveness and discovery of new things is thrilling to me.
So you're talking about the literary as well as the theatrical, and we have many acting and directing background teachers here, some playwrights. We'd love to have you talk about a little bit when you're playwriting, and then you give it over to interpretation by these other artists. What's in your head? Like when you're writing the play, are you,
when you hand it over?
When you hand it over.
Paranoia and.
Is it a take care of my baby? Is it a gift? Do what you want with it? Is it somewhere in between?
I have a friend who's been a director for 30 years, and he wrote his first play, and he was about to have his first reading, and he texted me right before the reading, and he said, "I'm feeling incredibly frightened right now. What should I think about?" And I said, "You should know that this fear that you're feeling is because you're afraid that they're going to destroy this thing you've worked on, and you're right. They are." That hatred that you feel of everyone in the room, hang on to that. It's part of the joy of being a playwright is that you get George Wolfe, the great director. If you haven't seen his most recent film, which should have been nominated for 100 million things, it only got nominated for Coleman Domingo got nominated for his performance as Bayard Rustin, which is astonishing. George Wolfe, who directed the original Broadway production of Angels and who is one of the great directors of all time, directed this film. It's on Netflix, Rustin. And if you haven't seen it, you have to see it. I think it's been underappreciated because it isn't a flashy film in a lot of ways, but it's about the power of organizing, and it's more devoted to actually examining how Bayard Rustin organized the March on Washington, like piece by piece, than any movie I've ever seen. It's just an astonishing film. It's really great. And George always said that the hard thing for him, he's a playwright also, about being a playwright is, he said you have to be alone in the room with yourself, and then you get to go to the party, and then you have to leave the party and go back in the room. And I think that's true. Part of it is joyful. You hand this thing over to actors and to director and designers, and you get to see it come to life. And if you're working with really good people, they'll teach you things about your work that you had no idea were there. And if you're smart, you listen to the actors and you listen to the directors selectively, but you listen to the audience telling you what's working, what's not working, where you're losing them, where you're moving them in ways you didn't expect that you would do. And you get to revise the work in relationship to what you're learning. And that's a wonderful thing. The idea of being a novelist or a poet and having to generate this text and then sort of just really send it out in the world and sit around and, what happens then? I mean, you wait for the sound of people turning pages, or it's on a shelf or something. I don't get that. The liveliness of what happens when you're done, if you've done your work well, is really thrilling. And then, of course, things can go really badly. But unlike a movie, until I did my first film, when Mike Nichols did Angels in America, I didn't realize. I mean, you have a scene, and with Angels it was different because it was so close to the play. But when I did Munich with Spielberg, you write this thing, and then you know, the actors come and they do the scene, and it's filmed, and it's done. And it's not, I mean, I guess somebody could do another film when we did West Side Story, but mostly that's it. It's like feeding things into a wood chipper. It's like, okay, well, there it goes. So much for that. And sometimes you think, oh, that was really great. That's the best it could ever possibly be. And sometimes you think, oh, they kind of missed that turning point or something. And it's done. And the actors feel the same way, and the director mostly feels the same way, except the director gets to go in post-production and play around with it some more. But it's one of the reassuring things about theater is that if people screw it up in one place, it could get rediscovered and done better in another. And so,
And it's always in the moment, whereas film, and as you said, they can do takes and scenes and things like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about your coming from a theatrical writing first into screenwriting? I mean, what do you see as kind of I'm really curious how you approach that. Do you approach it differently? Do you really feel like I'm writing a theatrical piece that's going to be filmed, or are you really kind of...
I mean, I don't understand much about, I mean, I've made 4 movies now, and all with the same director. But he's a very good director. And I think now I've learned enough to, I think I can really call myself a screenwriter. I think at first I was kind of guessing, but I didn't understand. I mean, it was like a big revelation to me to think, oh, that a scene could be written from a number of different points of view, because of course a play mostly isn't. There's the proscenium arch or whatever it is, but if you can do it on a proscenium, do it on a proscenium, because it's the best thing Western civilization ever invented. It's there. It is. The audience is here, and the stage is there, and you can play games with that, but you're kind of locked into it. The idea that a scene in a film, that the audience is observing it from the eyes of another character, or objectively, or from the eyes of the, according to the main character in the scene. I mean, that you can play games with that. It was it's the most obvious thing about filmmaking, but it was a big revelation to me, and I've sort of slowly come to understand how I can play with that. So I feel much more at home now than I used to on the set. I mean, I love film, I love television, and I said this a lot, but it's so much easier than theater. It's so much more fun to watch than theater. Theater is so hard because you have to show up at a certain time. You can't watch it on your phone. And then it's alive, and that means that if it's bad, you can't hate it. Everybody loves to hate watch something on Netflix or in a movie that there's nobody there. There were people once there, but they're gone. It's just their shadows, and you're completely free to just loathe them and think, oh God, what you go to a play, and even if it's the worst thing you've ever seen, there's some part of you, unless you're just a real sadist, it's a live thing, and so it engages you in a way that a commodity form can't engage you. It doesn't mean that film is inferior in any way to theater, but theater, especially as we become more and more comfortable with commodity forms, as we become more and more cyborg, which is which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we are becoming, our intelligence is becoming, in part at least, hybridized with machine intelligence. It's we're becoming, synthetic in a way. But theater is an encounter with something that's just alive, and it's scary. The actors may screw up. It's not dependable. The performance may have been better the last last show and this one is lousy because the audience is lousy or the person on stage has a stomachache or whatever, or there was something terrible in the news that made everybody feel distracted. And you know what you're seeing is not the same thing that you'll see the next night if you come. It isn't fixed like a commodity form, and it engages us with a part of our humanity that we're not all that comfortable with. There's an intimacy to it and an unpredictability, and it's also, and I think this is when we say something is theatrical, I think this is really the thing we're talking about. It's really bad at creating illusion. It's you're sitting there. You can go, like, if you go see the Harry Potter plays, they do things that I've never seen anybody. I mean, just this Christine Jones is the set designer, is like this brilliant designer. So they do things that you go like, there are moments of going, oh my God, how is that even possible? The whole thing is, shimmying and shaking and all that stuff. But still, in 2 seconds you figure out how they're doing it. It's not CGI. It's not film illusion, even before CGI, which was so overwhelming and is so completely convincing. The great example of it is at the end of Hamlet. And Hamlet and Laertes have just had a duel, and they're both dead on the ground. And if you've ever done stage combat with swords, when you're lying dead on the ground, you're breathing because you've just been like running around like this, and they're supposed to be dead. And people who don't understand what theater is always say, it's so awful because everybody's like crying about Hamlet, and there's that body going, and it's one thing you can count on is that Shakespeare does nothing by mistake. If he didn't want the ribcage going like that, he could have ended the play without them having They didn't have to do a fight on stage, or they could have poisoned each other like Gertrude gets. It's deliberate, because if you see a really great production of Hamlet, even though Hamlet really is a gigantic asshole, he's an amazing asshole. And when he's lying dead, and he sort of reforms about halfway through the play, when Horatio says, "Good night, sweet prince," and "Flights of angels sing thee thy rest," you're going to cry, even though you know it's not real and the body is breathing. And it's that paradox, the failed illusion. What it teaches you is critical consciousness. It teaches you that nothing is what it seems to be, but it is what it seems to be at the same time. And it's that doubleness. I won't go into it now, but Midsummer Night's Dream, it's what Theseus and Hippolyta say to each other at the beginning of Act 5 or at the end of Act 4. I can never remember which one it is. When the thing that we see on stage isn't real, but it also is real. What Hippolyta says is that it grows to something of great constancy. And that weirdness is the big difference. And you really, if you work in theater, that's what you get to play with. And I think it's, there's nothing else like it. It's not better or worse than other things, but I love it. I mean, it's...
Well, I mean, as Hamlet says, the play is the thing, right? So even at the end, it's still the play. They're still playing. He talks about the intimacy of live theater. I will give a shout out to my father, may he rest in peace, historian. He could not see me or anybody. He hated live theater. He loved film. Live theater it was too much responsibility for him. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at a little bit. There's this responsibility of the audience to invest, right? And that's why we sometimes get frustrated, because we're like, what it could be. Whereas at film, you just turn it off. But you're still present and you're hopeful that it's going to turn around. Or all of us theater artists, when you see theater that you love, you forget that you're watching theater. You're just in that world. So I think that's that idea of intimacy.
Partially, although you for seconds can go into that world, and then something will intrude that says, no, and then the part of you that wants to be in that world goes yes, and you're caught in that back and forth, and that's how you should get through life. Yeah. I mean, that's what Brecht is all about. I mean, Brecht simply takes what is so extraordinary in Shakespeare and in Euripides and makes it a theory that his half curtain. So you see one scene coming in while the other scene is still being played out. And it says in one of his theater poems to show the audience, this is not magic but work. But it's also teaching you that you can't be a fundamentalist. You can't accept life as self-evident anywhere. The whole point of any kind of faith, and all art is faith, is a critical eye and the ability to read and interpret. And you have to be able to interpret,
construct, right,
and engage in a dialectical fashion with reality itself. Otherwise, you're a fool. I mean, that's what the rude mechanicals are in Midsummer. They don't get that the thing that you see is not the real thing. Right. So in their play, in Pyramus and Thisbe, they have to keep reading. I look like a lion, but I'm not really a lion. So don't be, and that sort of thing.
So again, room of educators working with young people. The next generation of artists or the next generation of creative thinkers who might watch AI-generated stuff, but hopefully will make their own stuff. How did young Tony Kushner get interested in playwriting? Or was it when you were in college? What is your journey in terms of your love of theater? When did that spark start?
Mine was because when my family moved to Louisiana, which is where I grew up, my mother was a really great bassoonist, and she couldn't. She played in the local orchestra in Lake Charles, Louisiana, but it wasn't enough for her. So she decided she'd try her hand at acting, and she was actually a really wonderful actress. And so when I was a little kid, we went to see her do, she was a bassoonist, so of course she was a tragedienne. She had a really sort of dark side. And I saw her do A Far Country, where she played Anna O, and I saw her do The Diary of Anne Frank, and so on and so forth, and Man in the Moon, Effective Gamma Rays. But when I was 5 years old or 6 years old, I saw her do Linda Lohman in Death of a Salesman. I had no idea what the play was about, but it was the early 1960s, so it was being done in the round, and women had eye makeup that ran. It was before waterproof makeup was invented. So I saw the play like 3 nights, and each night I would look across at the audience on the opposite side of the stage, and these women who were, my mother's friends and my father's friends and my Sunday school teacher and my first and second grade teachers were sitting there, and they were just like, raccoon eyes. just like mascara running down their faces. And I thought, something's going on here. And I remember it, very, very powerfly. I then stole one of his, I had to write a book report in second grade about of this little biography that we were supposed to read about George Washington, and I didn't read it, so I made up what was in it, and I
no
wrote,
no one will know.
Well, I got an A because it was a really good book report, and I said at the end that George Washington got on his horse, and it was raining, and he got a cold, and he died from the cold, and Martha Washington was at his bedside as he was dying, and she screamed, "You foolish man, why did you do it?" And many, many years later, like 30 years later, I was watching a production of Death of a Salesman and realized I stole that line from Arthur Miller. I was able to tell Arthur that story. He was delighted. So I think that was it. I did little plays here and there, and enjoyed doing them a lot as a kid. I went to, Louisiana public education is, 57th among the states. It's just like not good. So we didn't have a drama. I was a big debater, but we didn't really have drama classes, which I think was a terrible shame. I think it's an enormously important experience for kids to have, participating in it, watching it, thinking about it. It's an essential part of the human experience. Even though we're so far past theater now with TikTok and stuff like that, still so much of the way that we think of the human mind is based on models that are fundamentally theatrical. It's like geometry. It's at the core of the human being. So,
Yeah, that's why shadow puppetry will always, even with incredible technology, kids will always love shadow puppetry. Indonesian shadow puppetry, the simplest things will kind of strike. I want to open it up to, that's a good segue, to open it up to you guys. We have some time for some questions. Just going to ask you if you say it nice and loud, and I'll repeat it so that the other room can hear it. Go ahead.
I was curious about the writing partnership process for the Fabelmans, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
thanks.
How was it? Did Spielberg come up with an outline for you based on his?
No, I came up with the outline. I interviewed him for, well, I had been pushing him to make this movie since we made Munich. When we were on the set, one of the first night shoots for Munich, which was 20-something years ago. And I asked him, because I was just making conversation, how he had, did he have a sense of when he had decided to become a director? And he told me this story about the camping trip. And I said, someday you're going to have to make a movie of that. And then we became very, very good friends, and we made 3 more movies. And I kept saying, someday you have to do this movie, you have to do this movie. And then I think his mother died, and then his father at 102 was beginning to die. And lockdown happened, and he finished West Side Story, which was one of his all-time favorite shoots. And I think he was just sort of feeling in the mood to look back. So and also we were fighting so much while we were making West Side Story. I was screaming at him all the time. He wanted to sort of make sure for himself that we were still pals. So while we were doing West Side Story, he said, "Why don't you come over and interview me? I want to talk about my memories of it, and maybe we'll think about this thing." After West Side Story came out, I talked to him for about 2 or 3 months. I just interviewed him once or twice a week for long stretches, and he told me his entire childhood. And then I took everything that I had written down, and I spent a summer coming up with a fictionalized version of it. Because we were feeling like we might actually make it into a film, but we didn't want to make it into a film unless it could work as a film if you didn't know that it was about Steven Spielberg. So I did this 81-page thing that we called the Megillah, and then we took that and we together put it into an outline, we shrunk it way down. We just got rid of tons of stuff and found the core of it, and then I'm very slow. It took me 5 years to write Lincoln. We finished the first draft of The Fabelmans in 2 months. And it's like, I was blown away. So it was fun. It was really great. We did it on Zoom 3 days a week, 4 hours a session. And it was the most fun I've ever had writing.
Wow.
Even though Steven's about 10 years older than me, both his mother and my mother were of a generation, basically, the sort of Betty Friedan generation, right before feminism really began to, before the feminist revolution really caught fire and began to change everything. So they were aware of the feminine mystique had been published. I mean, there was an idea that something was coming that was going to change the way that women could imagine themselves in the world, but it hadn't quite happened yet. And there was a great division between my mother, who was very serious. She recorded with Stravinsky. She was the first bassoon at New York City Opera when she was 21 years old. When she told her mother, who was an immigrant woman from Poland, that she was pregnant, my grandma said, "Oh, I thought you were going to have a career." She was not happy that she was pregnant. I mean, it was a very different time. And Steven's mother, Lee, really struggled with that. She was a pianist, and I think I put a certain amount of my mother into. Well, some of my mother is in everything I write because, I love my mother. I'm a gay man. I love my mother. So. Which is not to say that straight men don't love them, but you know.
We're really at time. Is there one last question anybody has pressing that they'd like to ask? Denzel, did you have a question?
I was going to ask about Mr. Cohen in Angels of America.
Mr. Conan, Angels of America.
Yes. How does it feel having that iconic character? Everybody can say a line from that character. It's such a horrible man, but it's just an iconic role. How does that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, he scares me a little bit because it's sort of, you know, I mean, some of him is the real Roy Cohn, but a lot of him isn't. And I really loved writing him to the point where I began to think there must be something seriously wrong with me. Run away. And, you know, so Roy spent his entire life at a point when it would have been incredibly expeditious to ditch any loyalty to Joe McCarthy, who was a disgusting human being. But Roy had great loyalty. He wrote like 2 biographies of the guy and defended him to his dying breath. He actually sort of seems to have loved Donald Trump. If a character doesn't love anyone, if there's no coherence, it's very hard to write them. I mean, you could. Shakespeare did it, but you know, fuck Shakespeare. It's like, I always tell my writing students, if you're writing something, do not read Shakespeare or Chekhov, maybe Beckett while you're writing, because whatever you think you're doing, Shakespeare did it already and did it better than you will ever do it. So. And then I read Goethe, actually, you know, Johann Goethe said the same thing. He said Shakespeare is dangerous for any writer to read because he will depress you because there's no way to do what he did. Anyway, so, you know, I mean, but he's a fun guy, and it was.
Well, I didn't know that we would end as Roy Cohn, fun guy. But maybe fun guy, funchy. No. Can we give it up to Tony Kushner?
I'm writing something right now it'll be a 6-part miniseries, and it's about the teachers' strike in 1968-69 and about a production of Fiddler on the Roof that happened in Ocean Hill, Brownsville during the teachers' strike. So I've been spending a lot of time. One of the main characters, maybe the main grown-up character, is the drama teacher. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about drama teachers and drama classes and kids in theater. And I mean, it must be tiresome being a teacher to have people constantly come up and say, "Thank you for your service." But
do you guys hear that a lot? No.
Well,
so
if we lived in anything that actually deserved the name civilization, you would.
Amen.
It's of course there is nothing more important than being a teacher. Nothing has the effect on human beings. I mean, you can write a play and people. There's this great Onion headline, woman who says book changed her life hasn't changed at all. Because who knows what you do when you're writing for adults. But as you all know, you really change people's lives. You change the course of people's lives, and I have no doubt for the better. So it's an honor to come and privilege to come and talk to you. And so thank you.